From the Founding Fathers, who recognized the importance of tribal governments, to the era of self-determination, to legislation that propelled tribes towards self-sufficiency.
Ronald Reagan was for tribal self-sufficiency, and that's basically what is reflected in the law that he signed.
History is clear. When tribal sovereignty is supported, towns, counties, and states are stronger.
What few people understand about tribal sovereignty is that it predated the United States. It predates the state of Oklahoma. So tribal sovereignty, like any other governmental sovereignty, is the authority of a government body to govern itself. So for tribes, that's the ability to determine who their citizenry is, to regulate the activities within their borders, to interact with other sovereign governments.
Tribal sovereignty is poorly understood by most people. The argument is we're all Americans, we shouldn't have a separate kind of government. But we did before America existed, as a matter of fact. Tribal governments were sovereign and have been recognized as sovereign since the 1830s, when the Supreme Court gave a decision and said that the tribes were dependent sovereigns, and they're dependent only on the United States and not the state.
What most people don't understand is that the Enabling Act required as a condition of the state of Oklahoma to become a state and join the Union that they not interfere with the interests of the tribes or their lands. And so that was a condition of statehood.
Section 28 of the 1906 Act, the governments of each of the tribes continued in full force and effect. Congress continued its recognition of those governments. Meanwhile, the Department of Interior did everything it could to try to hamstring the operation of those governments. But the legal existence of that sovereign government was uninterrupted under federal law.
As tribal governments, they've retained their governmental authorization, their governmental powers throughout even the dark periods.
Both of the state governments and the tribal governments are sovereigns. They have unique statutory and constitutional powers, both at the federal government and the state government.
The core sovereignty of tribes has never changed. For folks who don't deal with it every day, it might sound new, but there's nothing new about it.
Despite those difficult times, the treaties, various laws throughout history have continually recognized tribes as governments. The United States Constitution recognizes tribes as governments. We've got the State Enabling Act, the state constitution, which recognizes the need to respect tribes and their properties. There is the Indian Civil Rights Act. We have the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. We have the Indian Reorganization Act and the Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act, all of which recognize tribes as governments and relate to them where they are at as governments from the standpoint of federal government.
Oklahoma's told itself a lot of stories over the years, and I think that what we're seeing really over the past 20 years is the folks who counted the tribes down and out just weren't right. They were wrong. It was the federal trustee kind of holding the tribes back and not letting the tribes speak for themselves. And that really started changing in the 1970s when tribes were able to take charge of their own governments again. And the tribes have been, for a couple generations now, rebuilding their abilities and capacities to provide for themselves. That is a tremendous success story here in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma thrives together.